There's a new exhibit that has just opened up at the Geo Centre that explores the mythological, dragons, krakens, mermaids. Now, one of the people behind it gave us a tour and talked about it.
You would see a brief overview of people talking about strange mythological creatures in early science, actually thinking of them as being real animals rather than describing them as mythical creatures. You'd see a section looking at creatures that are common in mythology that have a basis in history, a real scientific basis that we can often identify with a little research. Other things, you'd see sections looking at creatures that were believed to be fake for a long time but are actually real. You'd also find sections looking at creatures that are fakes, because there are a lot of fakes through scientific history and through sort of economic history. And you'd see sections looking at how mythological creatures are still relevant in things like society, for films, for television, for literature, etc. And finishing off, we'd look a little bit at Newfoundland's mythology.
What sort of local mythology would people find here?
A lot of the things we find locally are derived from our ancestry. Not surprisingly, a lot of people in Newfoundland have an Irish or an English ancestry, so a lot of the things that we talk about here are things like fairy circles, which are very prevalent in different parts of the island. And it can be flowers, it can be mushrooms, it can even be trees, for example. But we also have things like the kraken. There are a lot of reports of strange sea creatures off the coast of Newfoundland over centuries, and of course most of them are tied back to scientific sightings of real creatures. And of course we have things like the wall bologna, which is technically not a mythological creature, but it is certainly a little bit of local history that nobody else would know anything about when they come.
You're a paleontologist, so how did this spike your interest, or how did you get involved with this project?
Well, our director came from a meeting, and she was actually at a museum somewhere, and I believe she saw something that was looking at the science of some of the popular media, like Harry Potter, things like that. And we got talking about the idea of tracing the scientific origins of different ideas, and we were sitting around brainstorming, and we came up with the idea of mythological creatures, the science behind them. And being a paleontologist, of course, the first thing I thought was something like a dragon. We know that dragons are partly, in certain cultures at least, inspired by finding strange fossils. People thousands of years ago who found a dinosaur skeleton had no idea what it was. So they created a story to help understand what it was and to try to put it into the context of modern life for them. They didn't see the animal, but they knew it must have existed because we find its remains around. So that kind of snowballed from there, and it just became bigger and bigger, and of course became very exciting for everybody involved. And as a paleontologist, I kept finding ways to channel this back through real, definite scientific avenues, but as the discussion went on, it turned into things that are much more diverse, if you will. So the exhibit actually looks at a lot of things from some very different angles, which is the best part of working by committee sometimes.
You said that earlier there's some scientific explanations behind some of these. Is there one for mermaids? Is there a scientific explanation behind the mermaid sightings, or what do you think? Mermaids,
the most likely cause of mermaid sightings, we believe, was things like manatees and dugongs. When sailors were out at sea, and in all honesty, sometimes they were out at sea for months or even years at a time, you get a little bit stir crazy, as it were, and if you see or hear a manatee from a few hundred meters away, especially if it's a foggy day or if you've got cloud cover, you can't see it very well. The cries that they let out sometimes sound like humans singing or crying. So if you see this shape that's sitting on a rock, and they've actually got front flippers and they've got a long tail, they look vaguely humanoid when sitting in certain positions, but it looks like a human with a tail, with a big fin. So it's very easy to imagine that people who saw them from a distance and heard them from a distance thought they may have been human. Anecdotally, on the sign that we have in here for them, we quote Columbus, because he actually, the first time he saw manatees, he thought it was a mermaid and said they're not nearly as pretty as they're painted in the pictures. We're incredibly proud. I mean, we're delighted that we had the opportunity to do it. It didn't actually require a great deal of funding, which is good. I mean, because we did it all in-house, we didn't actually need a lot of stuff coming in from outside. We didn't need any funding. We didn't need any agencies to support us. So basically, I spent a lot of time working on the content, and different members of the group have actually been involved in different parts of it. So really, it's something during the winter, everybody kind of threw in a hand and did different parts of it. And as I say, we're incredibly proud because the displays themselves look fantastic. The three-dimensional components that we've got that were all done by our technical guys, they look fantastic. I mean, everything in here is, in all honesty, it's better than we expected it to be. We're all really pleased with it. We still got a couple of minor tweaks to make. We've got a few 3D things that need to be hand painted and put in place, but she's about 98% complete, and we love it.
Is this one of the things that you're hoping people will now take away, that the Geo Centre is more than just rocks?
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. I mean, one of the things we are best known for outside of our geological programming is our educational programs. We teach between grade 2 and up to high school, and we have specific programs depending on the year. And we have a program for each. Sometimes we even have 2 for different school grades, depending on what their curriculum links are for the year. So we do a lot of education that's outside of geology, and we're really hoping that people will see this as an opportunity to think, okay, well, science doesn't have to be about rocks. Because a lot of the stuff that's here, I mean, it touches occasionally on things like geology and history, but it looks at biology, it looks at the human imagination is a very big part of that. And again, that's something that can be studied and it can be quantified, but it can also be appreciated. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it here. But yeah, it's just one example of how this is a science center, not just a geological center.